I really had the opportunity to get away from everything, from my friends who had expectations, from family. I think that gave me the space to think about what I actually want. What I realized there is what I actually want is my own business.
Are you ready? All right. Hi there. Welcome to the Remote Work and Travel Show. I'm your host, Nora Dunn, aka the Professional Hobo. And in this series, I speak with people who have travel lifestyles and remote careers to get the real dirt on what it's like to travel long term while working remotely. Speaking of traveling long term, in the description, you will find a link to a free checklist of 10 things to do before you travel long term. And trust me, this will help you avoid all the mistakes I made 15 years ago when I started traveling long term. My guest today is Anna Claessen. Anna started her digital nomad journey 3 years ago after studying long and hard to get her master's in both law and business. She turned down the dream job at a big law firm to travel the world. After a year of backpacking and working crappy jobs, it was time to follow her dream and start the Podcast Babes. The Podcast Babes helps podcasters to monetize their podcasts before they have thousands of downloads. She does that through offering masterminds, online courses, and done for you podcast production with her team. Anna now has a home base in Hamburg, Germany, while traveling as a part-time nomad and running her podcast agency. Welcome to the show, Anna. It's so great to have you here.
Thank you so much, Nora. I'm really excited to be here and talk again because we actually recorded for my podcast also. So, I'm super excited to reconnect and talk even more about remote work and travel.
Absolutely. I love these podcast trade-offs because we get to learn lots about one another and deepen those relationships, in times when it's so great. I mean, you're across an ocean and I'm sitting here and, we're having this fabulous conversation and then we're able to share our conversations with the world as well. And I'm definitely going to want to dig into your podcasting business and what it's like to be a podcasting agency while traveling long-term. But before we go there, I want to go back to 2018. You just graduated university. How are you feeling and what happened?
I was feeling lost. I think that is the only way to describe it. I always had this goal in mind. I want to be a lawyer. I want to be a lawyer at a big law firm. And when I was studying law, I thought I was going to be an M&A lawyer. So I was going to do mergers and acquisitions, which is like the most corporate type of law that you can do, I think. And that was my goal. And I just had these blinders on and I was like, okay, this is my goal. I'm working towards that. Never second guessed it, never thought about it again. It's just, this is what I'm going to do. So then the end of my studies appeared and I was like, okay, so yeah, now like I'm gonna be working as a big corporate lawyer. Okay. I actually don't want to do that. That is what I realized. I actually don't want to do that. I don't want to be sitting in an office for 8 hours per week, which is not exaggerated. Like corporate lawyers work a lot. And I just, and especially doing this kind of work where you're doing a lot of due diligence, you're just looking over documents a lot, you're on your computer the whole day. No, I just really didn't want to do it. So that made me feel really, really lost, and I had no idea what the alternative was. So I decided that I didn't want to do this particular job, but then what? I had no idea. I really had no idea whatsoever.
Now, you had invested, getting a master's in law and business is a massive investment of time and money. Did you have any inclination while you were still studying that perhaps this conventional lifestyle was not going to be for you?
Not really, to be honest. I learned about a digital nomad lifestyle through podcasts. I was a huge podcast junkie when I was in university, and I knew it existed, but I never thought it would be something that I could do. I don't know why, but I was like, this is something that other people do. Also, when I decided, okay, I'm not gonna be a lawyer, I was like, okay, I'll just find another job that I want to do. I was always like, okay, well, there are so many jobs out there. I can still just do the traditional 9 to 5 and go into the corporate world, but I'll just sit on the other side of the table probably. That was what I thought. So to answer your question, no, I never expected to become a digital nomad and be where I am today.
So you graduated university, you realized, oh gosh, I'm not sure I actually want to be a corporate lawyer. You decided to take off and backpack around the world for a little while. Where what happened during that year to make you realize that perhaps you wanted to make that a lifestyle?
So what actually happened is I was so lost, and I was just looking at on all the job boards, like, what can I do? I have no idea, and I was getting so frustrated. And one of my friends from law school, she was taking a gap year, and she was in Australia. Um, and she called me, and she was like, "Why don't you just come to Australia, and we'll just travel together? We can do our working holidays here, and we can just travel a bit, work a bit, and you'll buy yourself some time without just sitting at home and having absolutely no clue what to do." So I was like, you know what, that actually sounds really nice. But then I also want to make a stop in Southeast Asia and backpack there before we go to Australia. And she was like, okay, sure, let's do that. So that's what we did. And what happened there is I really had the opportunity to get away from everything, from my friends who had expectations, from family who has expectations there, and other students. There's just a culture, especially in law school, I think, in my experience, that you go to law school, you become a big corporate lawyer, and otherwise you failed. And because I had the opportunity to really get away from that and literally be on the other side of the world, I think that gave me the space to think about what I actually want. What I realized there is what I actually want is my own business. I want to be my own boss. I want to do my own thing, build something of my own, and also, honestly, be the best boss possible. I have worked for some bosses, managers that were just, I think, not doing a good job. And I have very strong opinions about this. And honestly, I think I can do it better. So I want to do that. I want to build an amazing culture in my own business so that my team is super happy to work in this company. So that was also kind of a dream and a passion of mine. And I always thought, okay, I'll do that one day, like one day far in the future. But when I was in Australia and I was working at a strawberry farm, I had a lot of time to think just in between the strawberries. And I realized that there is no reason to wait because I had nothing. I didn't have an apartment. I didn't have a nice job with like the golden handcuffs that many people have. Like, it was not easy. That was not difficult to get away from the strawberry farm and pursue something else. Um, so if I wouldn't do it now, then what am I waiting for? So that is
Right.
basically what changed. So then I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna try and we'll see what happens.
Wow, that's fabulous. Well, so I'm going to make two assumptions now. I mean, you mentioned a little bit earlier that you were a podcast junkie, so obviously this was something that you really enjoyed consuming podcasts, and the more you listen to them, the more you get a sense of what works and what doesn't work. And I'm also going to assume, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that perhaps a master's in business may have helped inform your decisions and how it is that you run your current business now. So did or not, perhaps, I don't know, were there skills that you learned in school that you could transfer to your entrepreneurial ventures?
Well, when I started my business, I actually thought that I didn't use any of the skills that I learned in business school, because what they teach you in business school is how to be a manager in a big corporation, not how to start a business, how to start from scratch and be an entrepreneur. That's not what they teach you, at least not at the university where I was. It was very, very academic, and it just basically taught you how to be a researcher or a manager. So that was business school for me. Now looking back, I've had my business for 2 years now, and looking back, I do think that I learned a few things. I definitely learned to be flexible, to um, embrace change. I think that was a really, really important lesson. And maybe not just from business school, but also just life and traveling and making that gigantic pivot in my life. So I do think that I have some skills that I took away from business school, but it's definitely not a road to success if you want to be an entrepreneur.
So I'm curious, what does your family think of your chosen career?
The first probably year of me having my business, my family would ask me when it's time to get a real job, or when I'll be coming back from vacation.
Mhm.
And I mean that in a really nice way. And I still have an aunt who regularly tags me on LinkedIn for job postings. Like, oh, maybe this is something for you. I've had to explain several times I don't want or need a job. I have created the job. I am working. It's not a vacation anymore. So yeah, it was. I think it was difficult to understand for many family members, but now most, especially my close family, they understand. They understand what I'm doing, and it was especially really difficult to explain to my grandma what I actually do on a day-to-day basis.
Does she even know what a podcast is? I mean,
No, not really. So I just went to Spotify and I like played a podcast episode, and she was still not really sure what I have to do with something like that. So it's an ongoing challenge to make it clear to her what I do, but she kind of understands.
so I'm curious. I want to dig a little bit into the podcast Babes and how you've grown it and how you run it. But one of the things that I'm curious about is you say that you help people monetize their podcasts before they have thousands of downloads. Now, conventional wisdom suggests that you have to reach a certain number of downloads, you have to have a certain number of subscribers before you're going to be able to attract sponsors and other monetization techniques. How is it that you're able to help your clients monetize before they reach that threshold?
You're absolutely right, Nora. Most podcasters, when they want to monetize their podcast, the first thing that comes to mind is, where can I find a sponsor? And how I can help people monetize a podcast without thousands and thousands of downloads is because sponsorships are not the only strategy to use to monetize your podcast. And I believe that sponsorships can be really profitable and really nice and really like a good business model. However, if you're not there yet where you have this amount of downloads, there are way more profitable um, strategies to use to monetize your podcast. You don't necessarily need a huge audience to monetize your podcast. And I also work a lot with business owners who also have a podcast. So very often they already have a coaching program or an online course or an ebook or something to sell. And a podcast is such a great vehicle to do that because you have this opportunity to tell your story, not just once, but every week, twice a week, as like daily if you want. You are in charge. You can use the format that works for you, and you can say exactly what you want to say, and you can build trust with the listener relatively easily because you are in their head, you're speaking to them, especially like when you're what I like to do is I like to go on walks listening to podcasts, and then I have my AirPods in or my headphones, and there is literally a voice in my head telling me stuff. How
It's true.
powerful is that if you're the
Yeah.
voice? How cool is that? So it's such a powerful tool if you have a business, but also if you don't have a business, there's always a question that I ask my clients, and that is, how can you serve your listeners even more? So you're producing this free content now. what can you do to serve your audience even more and even better? And that is a possible way to monetize your podcast.
I did an earlier interview with my friend and colleague Gary Arndt, who pivoted his existing travel blogging business into a podcast, and he was talking. I mean, he regularly, talks about the glories of podcasting and things just like that. The podcasts have a much higher rate of being listened from start to finish. Audience members feel like they have more of a personal relationship with the podcast host because of exactly what you say. They're in your head, and you do definitely are able to develop that relationship. And like you say, if there is if you have a client who already has an online business and something that they're selling, then this is just another way to gain a new audience, and also to be able to develop that relationship, and then ultimately to market to that audience. I'm curious, how is it that you built the Podcast Babes?
It's been a journey, Nora.
I believe it.
It definitely didn't start like it is now. I started by taking a course to be a virtual assistant because I had no idea what my business was going to be. And I read a blog post about this course that the author of the blog post took, and it was to be a virtual assistant. And what she said is that it's just a really good starting point because it taught you all these different skills that no matter what you're going to be doing in the online business space, it will come in handy. So I was like, okay, sounds good. As a virtual assistant, you can get clients quite quickly. So I was like, well, let's just give it a go and we'll see. And the course had many different modules, PR, blogging, social media management. And one of the modules was actually podcast management. So when I saw that, I was like, oh, interesting. And going through the course, you also got an audio file to edit, and they told you what software to use and stuff like that, what you can do for clients. And I was like, I never knew this existed. Like, there's all this behind the scenes stuff going on before the podcast is on Spotify. I never just even thought of that. So when I learned about this whole industry and this job opportunity, I was like, that this is for me. That sounds perfect. So I started freelancing. I got my first client, which took a while. I mean, that was already a whole story of its own. Eventually, then got my second client and my third, and worked as a freelancer for basically a year. And what I liked about it was that it was relatively easy to build, and I really enjoyed the editing of the audio. Then what I didn't like was some of the other tasks that I was doing. So like scheduling and all that, it all needs to be done, and it's very, very important to my client that it gets done. But I wasn't necessarily enjoying it that much. So then I was like, I don't know, like wasn't really feeling good about that. And then what happened is that my biggest client kind of screwed me over. Hope I can say that on your YouTube channel, Nora.
I'm pretty sure that's
Yeah.
not a swear word.
So yeah, one day to another, she was like, "So yeah, take it or leave it deal. This is the deal that I have for you," and it was much less work, much less money. And I was like, "Well, sorry, but I mean, I cannot take that." And she was like, "Okay, well then, unfortunately, we'll have to go separate ways." And I was like, "Okay, but we have a contract, so." In 30 days, you can do what you want to do. But for now, you're kind of stuck with me for the next 30 days. So here's the invoice. And thank you very much. And she decided to breach the contract, not pay the invoice. And about 60 or 70% of my income was gone one day to the next. And I was like, this is a problem. This is not sustainable. I was just relying too much on clients. So both of these things made me realize, like me not enjoying all of the work that I was doing, and then also relying so much on clients, it made me realize that something needed to change. And I also got all this experience working for all these different podcasters. I had like a really cool behind the scenes look of all these podcasters, some pretty big podcasters, I was just editing their stuff and seeing their processes and how everything was going. And I saw what I think that's also where my business degree came in handy. I saw patterns. Like I was like, okay, this person is doing that. That works really well. This person is doing something else that's not working well. So I was like, I want to share that knowledge. I want to share everything that I learned from working with all of these different podcasters. So that is when I fired all my clients. Wouldn't recommend that. Completely pivoted my business, rebranded, renamed it to the Podcast Babes, and also started my own podcast, my business podcast. So it's also called the Podcast Babes. And I launched a mastermind, and I started working with clients one on one to help them with their monetization strategies. And then a few months ago, I just really still saw that need for podcast management. So, what many podcasters want or actually need is that they can focus on recording the episodes and the whole monetization and marketing part and all the backend stuff like editing, writing show notes, creating graphics and social media posts. And there is a lot of work going on behind the scenes. I mean, Nora, you know all about it.
Oh, yeah.
And it's for many podcasters, actually, for most podcasters, probably, it's not the most effective use of their time. They should be doing all the important things instead of editing an episode for 5 hours per week. So I really saw this need, and I decided to start offering podcast management again. But now I was like, I'm not going to do all the things that I don't like anymore. I really want to focus on the stuff that I do like and on the tasks that I really enjoy. So I brought in two team members, and they helped me. And I sent out a few emails, and I had 4 clients in 1 month, and I was like, okay, there was definitely a need. So yeah, and that's what we're doing now. So on the one hand, I still work with clients on their monetization. On the other hand, there's still the podcast management that I do with my team, and I love it. I'm really happy with where my business is now.
I find this fascinating because, of course, you started as a freelancer and you had the freelance clients, and then you experienced the downfall of freelancing, which is it's feast or famine. And when your clients go, so does your work. And I did another interview with Leif Pettersson, who spoke at great length about the pros and cons of freelancing and the whole idea that it is a constant hustle. You are constantly hustling for new clients, and it can be a real drain. So then you decided then to move from freelancing to the entrepreneurial model, which I find very interesting. Can you describe some of the key differences between freelancing and the entrepreneurial model?
Yes. I do want to say before I answer your question, I think for some people, freelancing works really, really well. I'm not that person. I think I am an entrepreneur. I do think I'm like a born entrepreneur, if that exists. And I think this is more my personality. For me, the big difference is now I'm basically, I'm actually the CEO of a small company, really small company. But that means that I am in charge of all the decisions, which sounds like fun, but sometimes it can be really difficult. But also find it fun. Like I like to be in charge and make all the decisions. That's just yeah, that's also really exciting to me. And then on the other hand, I'm also managing my team. I'm basically a manager with also a lot of decision responsibility. That's the entrepreneurial model. And then the freelance model, how I experienced it is that I was also just working on other people's stuff all the time. So I didn't really feel like I could do anything for me or my business because I was working on my client's podcast the whole day. And I felt like I was just staring at my computer screen all day. Now, I still do that actually if you look at like how much time I spend behind a computer, but it for me it feels different because I also have time now. Well, I made the time to actually build my own business. So yeah, for me that is the big difference. It's freelancing is working really hard in other people's business, and now I'm working really hard on my own stuff.
And one of the things that you did early on, which I commend you for, is you brought in team members. This is something that I waited way too long to do, and I tried to do everything myself as a solopreneur. And I think that that's something that many people do when they're in the beginning stages of any kind of business, because of course as long as I don't have to pay anybody, then I keep my expenses low. But you identified the tasks that you didn't like to do, and perhaps also the tasks that weren't worth your time to do, and you brought in team members who complemented your skills. So, talk to me a little bit about how you chose. I'm assuming you run your business 100% remotely. So, talk to me a little bit about how you found and chose your team members and how you work remotely together.
Oh yeah, that was also a whole process, and I definitely made mistakes there. Since building my team, I also had to let go to people because it wasn't the perfect match for different reasons. So this was also for me an emotional roller coaster, actually, because I like these people, and I want to work with them and give them an opportunity to work remotely, and I'm doing my best to build an amazing work culture. So I also want to let people experience that. So it was really difficult to then say, yeah, sorry, but this is actually not working. So, like, unfortunately, we cannot work together anymore. So the hiring process, I'm also still working on that, to be honest. Like, I haven't completely nailed it yet. So what I did so far is post in social in Facebook groups. I had about, what was it, maybe 200 emails coming in
Wow.
30 hours. So yeah, wouldn't necessarily recommend that.
Well, you
So
had your
that's why
pick
I'm
of the
saying,
crop,
like,
though.
yeah, um, like I'm still working to fine tune this process because this is obviously a lot of work going through all the emails. So there's definitely things I'm going to be doing different next time. If you want to use Facebook groups, put something in the job description, like use this word in the or use this specific subject line, so that you can filter out people who don't read a job description well really, really easily. Because yeah, it was a lot of work.
I want to pivot a little bit to your lifestyle because, of course, you built this business while traveling long or traveling full time. What was it like to build an online business concurrent to traveling full time, and how did you balance the two?
So luckily, I already had my fast travel while I was backpacking. So when I started my business, I I was ready to do a little bit more of slow travel. When I was backpacking, I would just change locations every 2 or 3 days, maybe 4 days. A week was really long in one location. I'm building a business that, I think that that's not really possible. Then you just don't have the space or energy to focus on actually building the business. And I listen to a lot of podcasts from online entrepreneurs who are already remotely or living the digital nomad life. So I try to learn from other people's mistake here, and yeah, really do slow travel. So what I did actually is I locked myself in an Airbnb in Hanoi, Vietnam, and I was like, okay, I have a month, let's go. Again, wouldn't recommend it. Sounds more fun than it is. There was no community, no digital nomad community in Hanoi. It's just not well known for it. So yeah, and also an Airbnb, you don't meet people in your accommodation, like it's not a hostel, which was good because I wanted to focus on work, but I didn't have any social time really. So it was actually quite depressing. The advice that I would give people who are starting digital nomad life and also building a business: go to a place where there's a really good digital nomad community, because you can meet people and you can learn from them. So that's, like, looking back, maybe what I should have done, could have done. Because after that, I went to Da Nang, Vietnam, which is only like a 1 hour flight, or what is it? And it was completely different. There's such a big digital nomad community. Everyone is so open to meeting new entrepreneurs. I got so many tips and tricks and good conversations from other digital nomads. And I felt so much better while building my business. And I think the important lesson that I got there is I cannot focus on building my business if I don't feel well. I need to be a happy, well rested person to be able to really build my business. That's also what I've been trying to do since then, which hasn't always worked because there was a pandemic that came into play there.
Yeah, there was a pandemic. Did you hear?
Yeah.
So I'm curious. I want to go back to Da Nang for a minute. And how was it that you connected with other digital nomads in Da Nang?
It was actually in Indonesia. It was even before I went to Vietnam. So I had the idea, but I didn't really start building it. So I met a girl working on a laptop in a hostel, and I said, "Hey, you're working on your laptop? Cool, me too. What are you doing?" So I just asked, and we were kind of doing the same thing. She was also at the beginning stages of her business, and we stayed in touch since then. So I was in Hanoi just all by myself, and she was also probably, I think she was in Thailand or something. So we stayed in touch, and I told her, "So I'm going to go to Da Nang." And she was like, "You know what? I might join you." So I already had one person that I knew, which was great. And then what we did, there are digital nomad meetups every week or every other week, I don't know. So we just walked in, and there's usually just a bunch of people sitting at a table, and then you're like, "Hi, is this a digital nomad meetup?" And you're like, "Yes." And then people will start asking you questions, and it's so easy to make friends at these meetups, in my experience. So it's a little bit scary to go there. I'm an introvert, so I find it scary to just walk into this room with all these people that I don't know and then be like, "Hi." But it works so well. Like, it's
Yep.
so easy to meet friends. So just give yourself a gentle push in the right direction towards a digital nomad meetup, and you'll be fine.
So, at some stage of the game, you decided to come off the road full time and to establish a home base from which you would travel part time. And I don't know if the pandemic inspired that transition for you, if you had already made that transition prior to the pandemic. I personally can certainly relate to that. I was traveling full time for 12 years before I decided that I also wanted to have a home base. And it's definitely revolutionized how I run my own business because I have this opportunity to come back to my place. I've got my creature comforts. I've got full control over my environment. Often when I'm traveling full time and I don't have control over my environment or there's people around that provide distractions, it can be problematic. So now I know when I come to my home base, I can really crank out the work, and then I can travel for weeks or months at a time and continue to work, but more on a level that allows me to balance those travel experiences with those work experiences. I'm curious for you, what was the impetus for you to establish your home base and how it has been for you to travel and work since then?
Yeah, it's actually really recent that we have this home base. We've moved into this apartment 4 weeks ago. So
Oh,
it's very,
geez,
very
wow.
recent. Yeah, it's super
Okay.
new. And yeah, so what happened is I actually met my person, my boyfriend, in a
Oh,
hostel in Thailand, as you do as travelers. Walked into my hostel room. He was there. I was like, "Okay, you come with me." That's not exactly what happened, but basically.
you here now.
So yeah, I don't know, like that happened, and he is from Hamburg, um, where we are based now, and we chose to go to Bali and to be there for 5 months of the pandemic, the first 5 months. So last week in August, we came back to Europe because things were getting really unclear in Bali, like visas, and there was a lockdown which was really, really strict and also super unclear. So we were like, you know what? And I was already away from home at that time for 2 years. So I was like, you know what? It's fine. We'll just go back to Europe and we'll see. We'll just go back for a few weeks and then travel again, right? That was the plan. Haha. I went to my parents' place, he went to his parents' place. We visited each other, so we did a long distance relationship thing for actually a year. To be honest, we had an in that year we had a temporary apartment here in Hamburg for 3 months because he found a job here. He was not remotely; he was just traveling. We got a temporary apartment. Someone who was away from home for work. So we were in his apartment for 3 months, which was awesome. And yeah, then that ended, and we're like, okay. So I was like, I want to go traveling again. And then I think a new corona wave hit, and everything locked down again, and we couldn't really like, we could leave, but it wasn't perfect. And he had his job here. I mean, it's getting better, but it's still not the ideal situation to travel now.
Mhm.
And he has actually a new job here, and he's also doing a course to, or like, no, not a course. He's actually going to university, sorry, to be a graphic designer. So he is definitely working on his remote career as well. So for now, he also needs to be here in Hamburg at least 50% of the time. So yeah, that's actually what brought me here to Hamburg. I really love the city though. And I also see this as an opportunity because we also got an apartment that is not too big, also not too expensive. So that also means that it's not really holding us back. If we want to travel again, we can. But for now, I'm just enjoying having an apartment and just having a blender, so nice. Just these little things that you don't really have when you go from Airbnb to Airbnb. So I'm just trying to enjoy that and then take some trips, maybe like 2 or 3 weeks at a time, maybe a month. And then when he is also remote or when there's a new opportunity, I also want to go again for a longer time and just sublet the apartment. But for now, this is actually awesome.
I love how the one thing that you called out that you love about having your home base is your blender. Like, and
It
you
is
know
really
what?
nice.
No, it's funny because it's true. Because you know what? I have one too, and I love it. I love my morning smoothies. I love my accoutrements of
Yeah.
comfort, and I love to cook, so I have a fully equipped kitchen, and it's always nice to come back to that and to be able to have those experiences. Because when you're on the road and you're living in Airbnbs that have usually pretty substandard kitchens, or if you're staying in a hostel, the kitchen facilities are just generally pretty horrific. So it is nice to be able to have those things that you deem important to you in your home base, and to allow those things to help you recharge so you can hit the road again. So power to the blenders. I'm all for it.
Yes. Yeah, and it's also honestly an interesting experience. I just recorded a podcast interview yesterday with also someone who also has a home base now. I think that's just also what the pandemic does to nomads. And she said that it's like dabbling back into making commitments, even though it's not that much of a commitment. I mean, we're renting this apartment and there's not even a minimum amount of time on the lease. So we could just move out next month if we would like, but it still feels like a commitment. So like these baby steps are also probably good to take. I mean, she said maybe it's time to grow up a little bit, which was I mean I agree. Like I felt a fear of commitment. Like renting a scooter on Bali for 1 month was a big commitment for me. Was getting a big commitment, but was becoming a big commitment. So I was like, I think this is actually good to have this experience and have a little bit of like balance in freedom and commitments.
It's really interesting you should mention that. So I think you and I differ in that sense, in that, well, at least your friend's observation about it's time to grow up. I do not equate having a home base with growing up per se. But having said that, I didn't start traveling full time until I was 30. I'd already run a huge business. Listen, I'd been married and divorced. I'd had places to live. So I grew up before I started traveling full time. So for me, that wasn't a rite of passage to come back off the road and to get a home base. But by the same token, I think what's really interesting about this is that the location independent way of life is really lifestyle design puts us all in the driver's seat. We are the architects of our lives, and we can make changes as and when and how we wish. And if I want to get rid of my place and start traveling full time again, I can. If I want to stop traveling altogether, I can. And that ability to design our lifestyle over and over again, and to reiterate and to iterate again, I think is really just a fabulous opportunity. And it is one of the beautiful things that remote work now is allowing millions and millions of people around the world to do, is to reimagine what their lives could look like, and then to actually make that happen.
Yeah, it's so cool. Absolutely. But then on the other hand, I also want to point out that, at least for me, having all the decision power, it can also be a little bit exhausting. Like, I can do anything I want. What do I want? Where do I want to go next?
Wow.
Where
Yep.
do I want to sleep? Do I want an Airbnb? Do I want a hotel? I can pick anything. That's also it also takes energy. And
Yep.
having a home base, like, I don't have to think about where we'll be staying
Yep.
because we'll be home. It's also nice.
Absolutely. And that allows you to, for me personally anyway, allows me to hit the road. Every time I leave home, I'm able to do it with a renewed energy and enthusiasm for the next place. Versus, it's such a fabulous observation of the I call it analysis paralysis or decision fatigue. When every
Yeah.
step of the way I've got to make these decisions. Where am I going to go? How am I going to live? I mean, full-time travel is really a job unto itself. And when you can at least alleviate some of that burden of responsibility, when the world is your oyster, where do you start? It's a double-edged sword. I mean, it's amazing, but it does also come at a cost. So thank you very much for bringing that up. That's an excellent observation. Anna, this has been an amazing conversation. We've talked about, building your business, and we've talked about podcasting and what a great opportunity this is for a lot of people. We've talked about the differences between freelancing and entrepreneurship, and we've talked about the lifestyle of full-time travel as well as having a home base and traveling part-time. Where can we find you?
Where people can find me, I have a podcast about digital nomad life where Nora was also a guest. It's called Digital Nomad Stories. So you can find that wherever you find your podcasts. And I also have my business is called The Podcast Babes. There's also a podcast there. So if you're really excited and interested in podcasting, then that is where you can go. The website is also The Podcast Babes, and there you can find more about the business side of things.
Thank you so much, Anna, for taking the time to chat with me and our audiences. I'm sure that many people will be inspired by how you have led your life, and excited to follow where you will go in the future.
Thank you so much for having me, Nora. This was so much fun.
With great pleasure. I'm Nora Dunn. I'm otherwise known as the Professional Hobo, and I will catch you next time.